Welcome to the Brain Development Podcast, and we're here to show parents there is a way to healing the behavioral learning symptoms of their autistic, dyslexic, ADHD, OCD, Asperger's, dyspraxic and dysgraphic child. And my purpose is to empower and help parents to understand that they can build their child's brain from the bottom up to invoke change. And today we have a truly transformative conversation lined up with a leading expert who's revolutionizing how we think about helping children overcome learning and behavioral challenges. Our guest is Dr. Josh Madsen, a highly regarded neurodevelopmental chiropractor, driven by a desire to dive deeper into the neurological research to better serve his patients. And over time, he's developed techniques that have gone beyond traditional practices in addressing the root cause, the root of developmental and neurological challenges. And unlike traditional methods, that's often focused on managing symptoms, but Dr. Madsen's work often emphasizes and addressing the foundational, mostly overlooked developmental gaps in the brain and the nervous system. And he believes that building a stronger brain and neurological foundation from the ground up, we can unlock profound and lasting improvements like learning, focus, coordination, and emotional regulation. And for parents navigating those complexities of ADHD, autism, dyslexia, sensory processing challenges, anxiety, and all of those learning and behavioral difficulties, Dr. Madsen offers a refreshing and hopeful perspective. He's dedicated to empowering families with the knowledge and tools to help their children thrive by addressing the root struggles the root causes of their struggles. And today, Dr. Madsen will guide us through this fascinating approach. So please give a warm welcome to Dr. Josh Madsen.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, absolutely. It's amazing. I love the fact I'm having a discussion with you as I've been watching all of your work and following you. You have an incredible social media following, and it's, I've been through that whole process with my own child. So I know how difficult it is as a parent to find the right treatment and find the right pathway. And I truly believe that this is the right pathway because I've gone through this in working with my own son to work from the bottom up, from brain development, gut function, and using a lot of the modalities and therapies that you use in your own clinics. So it would be phenomenal if you could give us an overview of and explain what the bottom-up approach to brain development is and how missing those developmental milestones can manifest into those learning and behavioral challenges that we see with many of these children.
Yeah. Yep. And, I'm going to talk about, I'll talk about primitive reflexes and I'll talk about vestibular development, ocular, but there's a whole phase even before that really gets missed in a lot of these kids. And that's the inflammatory load on these kids. That's the mitochondrial dysfunctions in these kids. That's a lack of energy production. And really how we see it is and also the research, it fully supports this. And I have tons of research on it's called limitlessfoundation.co, where anyone can go to and just read. But these kids have an underlying mitochondrial issue where they don't produce energy efficiently. Their brain is really inflamed. They have a lot of neural inflammation. But when those mechanisms are going on, they can't produce enough energy for their neurological systems to develop in the first place. So that's why we see so many kids that maybe they've been working on primitive reflexes or even some of these early foundational pieces for months and years and not really getting anywhere on them, but it's because they're still missing even just the basic energy production or cellular aspects that are needed for this nervous system to develop and mature. So kind of taking a step back is looking at, do they have enough energy to develop? Do they have enough oxygen to develop? Then are they getting the appropriate stimulation in the appropriate order to develop? And as you're referring to, that would be primitive reflex integration first, because a lot of those primitive reflexes should go away in the first year of life. Those are reflexive activations to really start to stimulate our brain and get our brain to grow and develop. And then what happens is as our brain matures and grows and develops, our frontal lobe develops, and then our frontal lobe comes in and inhibits or shuts down those reflexes. So that way we don't see them. They're always there, but our brain is typically functioning well enough to inhibit the reflexes. And then after that, more complex movement can start developing. Our balance center starts to develop. Our eye tracking center starts to develop. That helps to develop our primary motor areas. And then out of that, our cognitive centers and speech motor centers and the organization of our cognitive center starts to develop off of that. So going back to the basics is really what needs to happen first and foremost, and a good place to start, and especially those primitive reflexes for sure.
And some of those basics that parents can really think about, because you can go through being pregnant and having a child and thinking that everything's going to be okay, that there is just so much to consider when having a child. And actually thinking about, we can go into it, but not just yourself in producing a healthy child, but also when that child comes out, some of those basic things that parents should think about, even just down to the water that you drink and the filtration of that water, and not using fluoride toothpaste, and eating the right types of food, and staying on the outer aisles of the supermarket rather than the inner packet food aisles. It's those types of things that I think we have fallen into a society where convenience is just easy, but you're not actually thinking about what you're putting into your body and what causes that inflammation, not only in yourself, but in your child.
Yeah, I always tell parents, like, you really have to swim upstream and go against the flow of normal child development to raise a healthy child. And I see this even in my own family, and we're very strict with our own kids, and or with what we feed them, what gets put in their body, what access they have to any type of electronic or movie or anything like that. We're very strict with that, because we know that, like, for example, if you want to create attentional issues in a kid, it's not hard to do. You destroy their gut, you feed them horribly, and you give them a whole bunch of electronics, and you give them a whole bunch of food dyes, and they are going to have horrible attention issues. It doesn't matter who the kid is. But that's normal. That's normal in our environment. You wake up, you get Eggo waffles and cereal, and you get really no protein, and you get all these what's quote unquote normal, really benefits commercial and business a whole bunch, but it doesn't really benefit your kid at all. And so you have to go against the grain to really raise a healthy child, which is the hard part, is because you go to a party and these kids are getting XYZ, getting these cakes and these XYZ, and if you want your kid to be healthy, they can't really do that. And my 4-year-old now, he asks me every day, does this have gluten in it, or does this have too much sugar? Can I have that? But we taught him appropriately, and that he, is this going to hurt my tummy? And so he knows even at 4 that he can't have those things, and he's not going to make the appropriate decision. So I have to help him make that decision, but eventually he will.
And what do you think the root causes are of the epidemic that we're seeing with so many children? We can go into lots of different areas, but I think the main thing is the basics of actually getting your body ready to have a child in the first place, to not have the child that has the behavioral and learning issues, but also isn't in a place to develop that way, to miss their milestones. So what should parents be thinking about, and what causes those problems?
Yep. So there's 2 different things here. There's the health of the parents even prior to conception. And I'm going to talk about these. They're 2 different topics, but they're really one and the same. So there's the health of the parents, the inflammatory load on the parents, the autoimmunity in the parents, the underlying chronic health issues in the parents. That's one thing. But then there's the child and the research that we know on kids that have autism. Like, there was at the end of last year, a big study with like 400 references was talking about, I did a video on my YouTube over this, but it was talking about autism and mitochondrial dysfunctions. Then I extrapolated upon that and went into mitochondrial dysfunctions and what are the environmental factors that can dysregulate our mitochondria. And that would be environmental toxins like pesticides, herbicides, heavy metals, all these different environmental toxicities, packaged foods, BPAs, XYZ. And so these things, they disrupt our mitochondria. Mitochondria get dysregulated. We don't produce energy efficiently. The cell can't function appropriately. Then it swells, it bursts, and then our immune system comes in and tries to clean that up. And we start developing a lot of neural inflammation, which results in more and more dysfunction of that mitochondria. Now we don't have enough energy for that system to develop. We develop autoimmunities and all these other things against neurological tissue. And that's what we see in all these kids as we run labs to see, do they have any neuroautoimmunity? And the great majority of them do. But that's because that mechanism of mitochondrial dysfunction started first, and then all these inflammatory processes started off of that. But that's from our environment. Our environment is what created that mitochondrial dysfunction in the first place. It's the same thing that's happening with an adult that has autoimmunity against their thyroid or has celiacs or has XYZ. And we know now that a lot of those antibodies can cross-react with fetal brain tissue. So, for example, a risk factor, and this isn't all because there's so many different risk factors, right? So risk factors are not causative, they're correlative. But if a mother has even subclinical Hashimoto's or a thyroid disorder, we know those antibodies that the mom has can cross-react with the fetus's brain and cause and be an underlying contributing factor to neural inflammation and developmental delays. So, but the same things play into that: environmental toxins and this exposure that we're constantly getting of all of these toxins in our environment start that whole process. So that's why focusing on environment in our home and the health, what we're putting into our body and what we're eating and how much we're exercising and how well we're detoxing is so important prior to ever having a child in the first place. But it's also extremely important. The same things that help you be healthy over here before you're pregnant also are what help the child be healthy and allow their brain to mature and develop. It's the same thing.
Because obviously you're giving that child specific parts of you. You're actually passing over a lot of the microbiome that you have. And if you have a depleted microbiome and that child starts out with a depleted microbiome, and then you have all those other environmental factors, and then you feed your child the yummy stuff that they like eating, or the fact that you buy it and then they eat it, right? There's all of those different additional factors in there that also set that child up for their trajectory.
Yeah, and I mean, if you talk about that, of like they're supposed to get that natural flora as they come through the vaginal canal, and that is what starts to basically produce their microbiome in their gut. And then we have these healthy foods, these good fats, good proteins that feeds that microbiome. Well, when we eat tons of sugar, and let's say that mechanism didn't happen well, we didn't have a healthy microbiome to start with, and we can't regulate yeast and we can't regulate, candida infections and all these other, bad bacteria in our gut. Well, now every time as we eat more and more sugar, that just feeds that bad bacteria. It feeds that bad yeast or candida overgrowth. And that's what you see this all the time in kids that have autism. But again, just as you said, that starts much, much, much earlier. That starts with getting passed down first and foremost. And then it gets fed by our environment. So if we can make it a more appropriate environment, it can re-regulate and it can do what it's supposed to. But even like when you think of like an infant and it's getting formula, like a mother's breast milk is like 50% fat. And also breastfeeding is one of the most impactful positive correlations with prevention of neurodevelopmental delays. If people didn't know that dramatically reduces your risk of developmental delays. But it's like, don't quote me on this, but it's something like 50% fat, super high in fat. Where like formula is the first ingredient is pretty much sugar. Like if you look at it, it's like cane, it's like different syrups and things like that. If you look at all these different ones, the most common ones, they're like pretty much all sugar, which is going to feed all of that bad bacteria and not what an actual infant needs to develop. It is not even close to breast milk. And there's all these other components of breast milk that we can never replicate no matter how good the formula is.
So if you've gone through a traumatic birth, you've then gone and had a cesarean, and then your baby's come out and your milk hasn't come on and you've had to feed them formula. There's all of those different additional factors that you've gone through, which is going to have knock-on effects.
Yeah. Yeah. And if that scenario happens, because obviously that happens, there's
Yeah.
emergencies, there's whatever, their bacterial, they're going to get their first bacteria is going to be coming through the skin, which is not the vaginal canal. So that's going to be a completely different bacteria. So they're going to need support. They're going to need supplementation with, appropriate bacteria there first and foremost. But secondly, Weston A. Price, they have a really good formula like that you can make. You have to make it. If you want a good formula, you have to make it. And they have a really great one for infants that go through that to make sure they're getting proper nutrients and stuff like that. So that's, there is ways to help with that. Or if you can get breast milk from, a friend or a relative or whatever, that's going to be fantastic. And an infant really doesn't even have much of an immune system developed. They primarily get their immune system from the mother through that breast milk. And right around 18 months is when their immune system starts coming online. And that's also why we see a lot of regressions around that time frame too.
So talk to me about the developmental delays that we may see during those first 12 months, so that, parents that have a child that they may think is, posing certain symptoms, they can then look back and see and work out, where those developmental milestones hit. There are so many different parts of that first 12 months that are so critical to the development of the brain, and then the integration of primitive reflexes and how you use your sensory system. I'd love you to talk about that.
Yeah, my biggest thing that I focus on most is the motor system. So are they hitting their motor milestones? So that would mean, are they starting to roll right around that 4 or 5 month mark? Are they starting to army crawl right around that between 6 to 8 month mark? Are they starting to cross crawl on their hands and knees between that 7 and 9 month mark? And are they walking between that 11 and 13 month mark? Like those are I kind of give a 2 month window where I want to see those things start to happen. And if let's say they walk really early at 9 or 10 months, like that's a sign that maybe they didn't develop some reflexes that help them crawl appropriately. If they walk later than that, 14, 15, 16 months, those are signs that a lot of these reflexes aren't maturing and their motor system isn't maturing, or maybe they're just not getting enough stimulus. Maybe they're not on their belly enough. Maybe they're not getting played with enough on the floor. Maybe they're not getting rolled with enough to build all these muscles up in the appropriate sequence to hit all these things appropriately. But one of the first things that you'll notice with a lot of these kids that are delayed is even right away when they're born, and they should be able to turn their head really easily all the way to their shoulder. Normal range of motion is actually past their shoulder as an infant, but a lot of these kids, you literally can't turn their head 20 or 30 degrees, and they get a lot of resistance. And that's during a traumatic birth. We can get upper cervical dysregulations or injuries to our neck, and we can't turn our head through 4 ranges of motion. But there's something called the cephalocaudal law, where we develop from the head down. So the first movements we have is neck movements. Then we start getting shoulder activation. Then we start getting core activation. Then we start rolling, and then we start developing really from the midline out our movement skills. Well, if we can't move our head to begin with, we can't start the development of that process. So making sure that we just have normal range of motion to start is really vital.
And when I think back to my own son, so he came out stargazing. He didn't engage his neck and turn it to come down the birth canal. He came out. He was always quite a sweaty child. So obviously respiratory system's higher then, but he was always quite a clammy child. So obviously I didn't know anything about milk, gluten. I didn't know that. And then he started to develop, and he got to, he rolled over. I think he only rolled over one way. But then when I think back now, he combat crawled. So he went through that phase, but he never did anything else. He combat crawled and dragged his left leg and never actually got up and cross crawled. So obviously motor system issues. And then he worked out, he did get onto his knees, but he didn't cross crawl properly. And then he started walking between 12 and 13 months. So it was on time. But then we had a few words and his speech system didn't come on. So there was all of these signs that I never knew at the time. And that's why it's so important for me to put this out there and ensure that, individuals who have children that really need to put the pieces of the puzzle together to understand what is actually holding their child back, to then put the therapies in place with the different modalities to use and ensure that they can actually take their children through those milestones to build the foundation of their brain. And that's why I'm so passionate about putting this out to all the parents, to ensure that they all know that there is something you can do. It's not just an acceptance.
Yeah. And it drives me nuts because it's like, the CDC, they change recommendations. Like, a kid doesn't need to crawl and they can walk at 18 months and they'll be fine. And like, that's ridiculous, to be honest, because that's never, ever, ever been the case. And now all of a sudden, normal human development can just be delayed, and that's normal. Like, that's not okay.
No.
And if these things are caught early by understanding these motor milestones, an intervention at 9 months to get a kid to crawl or 10 months to get a kid to crawl is so much easier than if they're 6 years old and they missed all this stuff. Now they missed out on 5.5 years or whatever that is, 5 years of development that could have occurred much more appropriately. And the brain's always going to develop. Like, it's always going to adapt. It's always going to change. But if we can help earlier, you just saved tons and tons and tons of future rehab or speech therapy or physical therapy or occupational therapy. Now the kid feels like they're a therapy kid forever, when they could have just worked on something early on, and many of these they would have needed much, much less in the future.
Yeah, we went through all of them. We went through OT, speech therapy. We didn't go through the learning piece very well. Academics was really, really tough. Couldn't learn CVC words, couldn't read, couldn't hold a pencil properly, didn't like reading, still doesn't like reading. So we went through all of those things, and I think it really is so difficult. And I remember when I did your course, you said something which really resonated with me. If a parent's thinking about investing in their child, and their child is 3 or even 5 or 7, do it now in the next 2 years, because you've got your grey matter and your white matter, and you put it into a city. And it was just so brilliant in terms of, you've got the buildings and the roads. And it was such a great analogy, because it really did resonate with me. So the buildings were the grey matter, right? And the roads were the white matter.
Yeah, so it'd be like your gray matter develops pretty fast rate up to about like 10 years old, but it's highest in the first like 2 to 3 years of life. And I simply think of it as, if we're trying to build a city, those are the buildings in the city. The more buildings we can build in that city, and the bigger we can build those cities, the more complex that city can be, and the more people it can handle, and XYZ, right? Our white matter develops up to about like 20, but and those would be like the roads, the subways, everything that connects everything, all the tunnels, everything, right? And if we catch them early, we can build much bigger buildings, and then we can develop much more highways and roads that connect all that stuff. Well, if we don't get them early and we get them much later, well, now we don't have nearly as complex of buildings and structures, and we can still make connectivity or neuroplasticity and connections, but there's not as much to connect. So I always tell parents, like, if you're going to invest in your child's development, invest 90% of whatever, let's say you're going to spend X amount of money over 20 years, invest 90% of that in the first, as early as you possibly can. If it's year 1, 2, invest all of that, because it's going to pay dividends going forward forever, because everything else is going to start clicking into place off of that.
Yeah, I mean, it really did resonate with me, because if I'd have known, I wouldn't have gone through it's okay, he's going to develop. And you see a pediatrician, they're like, oh, don't worry, just give him a bit of time. He's not talking, he's 3. It might happen. Yeah. And it's amazing.
Waiting and seeing is one of the most dangerous things a doctor can ever say to you. It's like, wait and see for what?
Yeah.
See if they don't develop for the next 6 months, and now we just wasted 6 months. Like, I think it should be considered wrong, to be honest. Like, and maybe they don't need therapy, maybe they don't need rehab, but telling a parent like, hey, you should look into developmental milestones, you should work on some primitive reflexes, like, or you should work on developmental movements or whatever it may be that they're struggling with. But we never just want to wait and see if a child develops. We want to, if they are delayed, we want to promote development and neuroplasticity in any and every way we can. It's going to save you so much time and energy later in life and save that kid so much struggle that doesn't need to happen.
So tell me what, in your clinics, tell me when a child comes to see you, what do you start with? Because I know you do things before a parent even comes in to doing it. Maybe they're coming in to do an intensive or an assessment, and you actually do lots of the inflammatory markers and labs before they come and see you, which I think is just brilliant, because you don't waste loads of time. You actually know what you're dealing with, and you can start putting in place things with the family before they come and see you for that treatment.
Yep. So we do a phone consult. So one of the doctors does a consultation, gets an understanding of what's going on, what labs we typically want to run with, whatever symptom-wise is going on or populations coming in. And because we want to know, are they producing energy? Do they have enough energy for when we go to activate the brain that there's actually energy there or ATP there to activate the brain? We want to see if they have neurological autoimmunity. We want to understand if they have environmental factors in their house that are creating chronic inflammation that's going to stop that brain from developing. Because the last thing I want is a kid to come to us, do really well, go home, get put back in the same environment that was creating this in the first place. Like maybe they had a mold toxicity in their house they didn't know of. And we find that out all the time. We'll find mold toxicities in kids, and they'll get their house assessed, and they'll have to remediate their house, and the kid starts doing better. But it's because we run the labs to figure it out. And so then we'll start making dietary modifications, supplement recommendations, getting nutrients, whatever it may be based off of that testing we do. But also it helps us understand when they get here, if they have autoimmunity against their cerebellum, we're probably going to find a whole bunch of issues in their cerebellum, like with their physical exam. We're going to find abnormal findings that relate back to that cerebellum. So then we're going to do an exam. When they get here, we're going to do a neurological exam and figure out what is the brain or dysfunctional. There's different functional tests for every aspect of the brain, or most aspects of the brain, I should say. And then we're going to do a primitive reflex assessment. We're going to do a balance or vestibular assessment. We do computerized ones if the kid's old enough, so we can standardize it for their age. And then we do an ocular assessment, a computerized one to standardize it for their age. So we know, do they have retained primitive reflexes? They're in the 20th percentile for their age in balance, or like proprioceptive, vestibular, and visual aspects of balance. And maybe their right eye, they're in the 50th percentile for their age. And so we know that. And then we put together treatment protocols that we've developed for all of those different things.
And you use oxygen, and you use EWATs, and you use
hyperbarics.
And you use red light therapy. And I'm a big lover of the Avant laser. It built my son's left brain. It really transformed.
It's awesome.
It transformed our world, and I saw huge changes when I started using it. But we also use many other, sensory integration methods too. But that laser was just amazing. Tell me how you use it and what difference it makes. Like, give me some examples of some of the children you've seen transform within weeks in using it.
Yeah. Your brain needs three things to develop. It needs oxygen to produce enough ATP. It needs ATP, and it needs stimulated. It's that simple. You give them oxygen to get oxygen. We use lasers to increase ATP. It upregulates mitochondria. It upregulates cytochrome C oxidase on our mitochondrial complexes, and then it's complex 3. And so we get more ATP. So now we have more energy to the brain. Now we can go and stimulate it, and we can create a bigger response. That's how we do it. And that's why it makes a change, is because we just have more energy to the brain. So from example on like changes, before I started using those, I did traditional rehab, primitive reflex rehab, doing movements, doing whatever it may be. And I would say the great majority of the time, we don't even have to do movements for primitive reflexes. We can use different brain stimulation, getting energy to their brain to get rid of those reflexes in a lot of cases. So like even with these kids that are really severe nonverbal autism that can't do anything, you can't get them to do anything, we can usually get them to the point where the reflexes are gone anyways, just by getting that neural inflammation down and activating the appropriate networks and using other tools to fire up those systems. But like we see, I mean, all the time, reflexes go away really fast. Balance centers improve, eye tracking centers improve, gross motor skills, communication, kids that are nonverbal. I mean, it's wild how many kids, I used to think it was impossible to get a nonverbal child to speak, but now it's very often, which is so cool. I would have never, ever thought that was the case. But without lasers and without all these other things that affect the mitochondria, I never saw that ever. But now we see it very consistently, which is super cool. Behavioral regulation, that's usually one of the first things. They're calmer, they're easy to work with. Kids that have attention, that changes all the time. Reading changes all the time. I mean, I have kids that jump entire grade levels in reading after a couple week intensive. It's kind of wild. Just, if they can't track their eyes, they can't follow a page, they're not gonna be able to read. But yeah, it's really cool. We just got some stuff put into our notes and starting to use AI to help us so that way in a year from now, I can know this person comes with this symptom. We do these therapies. This is a percentage change we get, which I don't have that data yet, but we're working on putting all that together.
Yeah, it's very cool. I mean, it's just, I think the differences that you can get through using these methods is phenomenal, to a point where, there literally is nothing in the UK, anything like this. You can go and see an OT, you can go and see do some speech therapy, and you're coming in at the top of the pyramid. You're not coming in at the bottom. You're not actually doing anything to change the body, change the gut, change the brain, in order to ensure that you can either reduce that inflammation, because we're not being told about that. We're not even told when perhaps you should just feed your child, a good diet with clean food and, no gluten or dairy. That isn't even advice that is given. It's just,
that's crazy.
There is literally nothing. So to actually get to this point, and I've been doing this for 7 years now with my own son, or I started 7 years ago. I haven't been doing it consistently throughout 7 years because he's got so much better and he's flying at school now. So for a child that had really bad sensory processing issues and misdiagnosed dyspraxic, but he was dyslexic, you wouldn't even know that he didn't have, he had all of those speech issues, and he's just coming home. He came home tonight with a 73% in a science test. And, those things didn't happen to us. We were the 20% to 30% child. So I know that I've built his brain in a great way in order for him to now take that forward. And I can kind of step back. I don't need to worry about that anymore, which is a great relief, because as a parent, it is so worrying and just so concerning and exhausting. And the amount of parents that I do see in clinic that are exhausted by the process, and they're at burnout and they need that support too. So, it can be incredibly demanding on you emotionally as a parent. And also, and I'm sure your parents went through it as well, because I know you had difficulties growing up as a kid, but what are those strategies and resources that you recommend to parents when you see them in clinic for themselves?
That's, great words here. Well, number one is like a lot of people think their kid has a behavioral issue. A lot of people think their kid has a learning issue, and it's usually that they have a developmental issue. And if you can get them developing, those things will change. Mm-hmm. And just the understanding of like, my kid isn't, I would never call a kid a bad kid, but like my kid is a quote unquote bad kid. Like I don't know that I've ever really found that to be true. I usually find that they have severe neuroautoimmunity and extreme inflammatory issues and big developmental issues. And once those get regulated, their kid is can adapt to environments so much better and are so much calmer and is so much easier to work with. But it's a true survival mechanism. So first thing is realizing is that there's underlying reasons for what's going on behaviorally and symptomatically, and that takes a lot of stress off of their brains as well. Like the parents, it takes a lot of stress off of them just knowing like, oh, I didn't raise a quote unquote bad child. It's like they miss things, right? They miss developmental stages. They have all these things going on that they didn't know about. That's relief in itself. But as like a leader of your household, like your child can't be healthy unless you're healthy. Like it's as simple as that. They follow the example that you put into their life. Like for example, I get back from a run and my son who's 4 he gets angry because he wanted to go for a run with me. So he goes out and he starts running around. Well, they're going to follow everything you do. If you eat healthy, they're probably going to eat healthy. If you eat really poorly, they're going to eat poorly. If you don't exercise, you're probably not going to reinforce that they should do exercise. But if you do all those things and you make yourself healthier, they're going to follow in your example because you're like a hero to them. So just making sure that you're taking care of yourself so that your child realizes that they should also take care of yourself is huge. And making sure that a parent does that from physical, emotional, nutritional, psychological aspect. Get support, get coaches, get other people to help you on this journey and talk to other people. Because that's, I can't relate to someone that has a child with autism because I don't have a child with autism. My son had PANS, so I went through that journey. I can relate to those parents and the struggle of that and how hard that is. But the more consistent I get in my life, the more consistent I am with therapy on my own child. So when I'm more consistent, my own child does better as well. So those are just important things to remember of. It's not always about your child. It's you need to take care of yourself, and that will also help your child.
Yeah, I think that the level of guilt that parents have when you do have a child that has learning and behavioral issues is also, you beat yourself up most of the time to understand why, because I know I did myself. And, what can I do? And I'm just an exceptionally determined person that whatever somebody said to me, I'd say that's not true. I'm going to work out how it can be fixed and what's the root cause. So, but, sometimes parents are just so drained. And, I've had those days as well where you are just so drained, you just want to give up because it's just so difficult and you've dealt with, the 5th tantrum of the day, or, it's been a really difficult day and you just don't want to do the therapy. But when you do start on this journey and you do start to understand from lab testing, and we did things like the Neural Zoomer Plus test, so we understood what viruses he had, what mold exposure, we did mycotoxin test, mold exposure we had, and a lot of ours was through food rather than our house, which is shocking, the amount of food that has mold in that we're all consuming.
Yep.
And there was a recent PubMed article on UK and the mycotoxin levels in cereals in the UK. That was only weeks ago. It was absolutely
Will you send that
shocking.
to me?
Yeah, I've got it. I
want to see that.
I'll send it over.
I haven't seen it.
Yeah, it's really shocking. And that was only a few weeks ago that that came out. It was, we went through a lot of mold protocols. We bought a sauna. We did the saunaing. We did all of that piece. But when you start to reduce the amount of neuroinflammation and improve the gut health and get rid of the dysbiosis, you do start to see, huge changes. And actually it's cognitive changes that you see. And we were working on the primitive reflexes and sensory integration too. But those cognitive changes just are, like the therapy is like this. With other traditional therapies, you can kind of climb little steps, but this just keeps going. And like I said to you, if I hadn't have started all those years ago, we certainly wouldn't be in a place where we are now, where he's 14 and getting great results at school, of which would never have happened academically.
And a note on that is like you're talking about a parent that feels bad or they feel like they did something wrong or things like that, is you're in a scenario right now where obviously it's very challenging and I can't even begin to imagine, some of these people's daily life, to be honest. But the environment you don't know what you don't know, and you can't imagine what's been put into our food, what's been put into our water that you have no clue about, that is just standard things, or what's put into a kid's body, and what's in those things. Like, there's no way for an average person, unless you study this like you have or I have for years, there's no way to understand what's in those things. You're just taking whatever recommendation, or you're getting your water from the tap thinking, oh, this is clean, or you're eating these foods, or you're living in this home that maybe it's full of mold, but you have no clue. And the average person just has no understanding of this, and it's not their fault, but it's the system's fault. To be honest, it's the construction industry is building houses that are not healthy.
Yeah.
The water supply is not healthy. The food supply is not healthy. And that's a much, much, much bigger issue. And, the more of those things you can look at, the better your, long-term health is going to be for yourself, but also your family.
It's just the layering and the layering and the layering. But then, with the potential, the start, there was, right at the beginning, there was an imbalance. But with all of the other layerings as well, you're just...
That load just got bigger and bigger.
Yeah, that's it.
The body can only adapt to so much.
Yeah, and actually also if the systems aren't operating as well, so the liver's not working properly, the kidneys not working properly, that filtration's not working, and the levels of mycotoxin or mold exposure and breathing in as well. So you've got it all in your sinuses, but you don't realize it. And then you've got cold after cold after cold, and sinus issues and sinusitis, and you just don't know that you're just a walking mold spore in the end. And using the right nasal sprays and detoxing with binders and, using saunas, it takes time, it takes investment, it takes commitment, but you can change it. And, I've done all of it. We've been on quite a journey ourselves.
Well, and a question I have for you is, if your child didn't have autism, if you're, or developmental delays, if you didn't go through all this, would you be doing this now?
No, he was my gift. He was my gift.
Yeah. So I don't think God puts things into your life that you can't handle and that you can't learn from. And those experiences are eventually going to help someone else somewhere. And just like you, he's your gift, and you learned a massive amount from him, and God, whether you believe in God or whatever aspect, but he was put into your life for a reason. And we don't always know what those reasons are, but there's always a purpose, is what I truly believe, and what I see over and over and over again. So,
and I think
always remembering that, and
the people that I see in clinic, I see parents that say, why me? And why have I been sent this child? And actually, when you start to look deeper, I see exactly that as well. These children have been sent for a reason, to actually either help you, or for you to help them, to go on a journey, to unlock and work out how to ensure this child actually moves through a developmental trajectory that is the best they can be. And I think I see exactly that. They're sent for a reason, and he was, Archie was sent to me for a reason. And I think, sheer determination of learning all of this, from functional neurology to the developmental milestones, and how to actually help children on these pathways has put me in a position where it excites me about my next 20 years doing it. Because
you're going to be able to help thousands and thousands of kids that would have had nowhere else to turn.
Yeah. And all the parents as well, because the parents are the ones that also need a hell of a lot of support, because I see it every day, that some of them are just struggling so much because they have their own underlying things that are going on, whether it is, gut issues, thyroid issues, anxiety, things that have manifested their whole lives that they haven't really dealt with as well. So, there are things that they need to go through too. But it's, I think one of the things that I found most difficult on this journey for myself and my son was there was just nobody to support me. In a point of, is nobody on the end of a WhatsApp to kind of confer and say, am I doing the right thing? And when I did start going through this journey, some of the exercises just seemed crazy, and you start to question, why is this not in the NHS? Why am I doing this every single day? And is it actually making a difference? But, you go through the process, and if you're pretty determined and you believe, and you have to have the belief that your child is going to get better, because if you believe it will happen, and you go on that journey and you stick with it and you do the consistency, because it is about being persistent and consistent all the time and sticking to it as much as you possibly can, and not deviating and not giving them gluten, or, having those days where you think it's okay. No, it really does need to be a process that you stick to for a long period of time, but then giving yourself breaks and giving your child breaks from the exercise also, I found that really does help with, just the levels of movement and cognition really starts to settle in, to then go back to it. I find that has really helped.
And that a point on that is like, that's, so I ran track in college and Division I, and there was these, phases of training, right? And there's these training principles where we would work out really hard, and we'd build over like a 3 or 4 week period. Then we'd have a rest week, but then we'd come back much faster, much stronger after that rest week. And allowing your body that time to adapt and change is really important. And I think that's one of the biggest values of like an intensive, is where we do a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks or 4 weeks of really intense therapy. And by the end of it, they are tired. That's normal. But then they get massive growth after we give them a little bit of a break. And it's, I think, just from my background in exercise science and in these training principles, is I see it the same way in a lot of these kids. There's a big crossover between sports performance aspects and training philosophy, and also neuro rehab for a child that has a developmental challenge. It's really interesting.
Yeah, I've really had to, on the journey when I was doing those years, and the good 3 months, and then coming off it for a break, and then doing it for another 3 months, and keeping the diary, committing to myself and to him that I was going to do it. The levels of, if you go through it and you just think, all right, in 12 months time, where are we going to be? You see those gains and you think, where else can I take him? How far can I get him? And my husband always used to say, when are you going to stop? And I was like, how far can I take him?
Yeah.
Because it becomes like an obsession. You just see the differences and the changes, and it happens so fast, really. Because, even though he was 6 to 7 when we started, the differences, if I'd have started earlier, like you said, if I'd have known that dragging his left leg and just combat crawling and not rolling over one way, but can only roll over the other, and, not speaking properly, even though he was walking, if I'd have known those things, I'd have been able to just get him so much further. But hey, I wasn't meant to know them then.
Exactly. There's purpose for everything, and there's a timing for everything. We never know until later. And now look where you're at and what you're doing, and what you're going to make a massive impact for thousands of other kids that you probably wouldn't have if that was the case.
So tell me, what's your next vision? What's the real dream? Because I know that you want to really take so much of this out there to thousands of practitioners and thousands of more children. Where's it going?
Yep. So we have, we just opened a clinic in Minneapolis a couple months ago. We're opening one in Denver in July. And then I got to get a real good system to make sure that all the protocols and everything are staying consistent there throughout those clinics. And then I can do more after that. But that'll probably take, I'd guess, a year or two, just to make sure that we have everything smooth and growing and, and all that type of stuff. And then I have parents courses, I have doctors courses to train them on these things and help them learn. And I'm actually working on using some AI software to take a lot of these protocols and make them accessible to people that will never be able to afford to come here, can't ever travel here, can't ever get here. You know, countries like India where the value of the dollar is so low in comparison to the United States or South Africa or different stuff like that. But now we have tools and apps that can be made to make things accessible. So those are things that I'm working on right now is utilizing current technology to expand those things. So those are projects we're actively working on that hopefully will be done here in the next few months, but we'll see. Hopefully things don't get derailed or anything like that, but hopefully just bring more help to people and so they can do assessments from home and they can have protocols and programs that they can do at home to help their kids.
Yes. Well, the impact you're going to have is going to be huge. You're already having a huge impact, and I just love following you. All of your videos on Instagram are just the best. And I'm, all over them the whole time. So I really appreciate the time that you've spent with me. Thank you.
You're welcome. Of course.
It's been
You're
great.
Very welcome. Well, wouldn't be anywhere where we are without the team we have. So it's not me. It's the doctors here. It's the staff here. It's the media team that puts it all together. I just go in front of a camera multiple times a day and talk. So it's really big thanks to them and they're the ones that put a lot of that hard work in to get this out to people. So it's a huge thanks to them.
It was a real pleasure. Thanks.